Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Ben 23 Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing the third episode of Ben 10 Omniverse to feature Ben 23, and then there was Ben. So, previously on Ben 10 Omniverse. So, last week we were introduced to a variant of Ben from a reality where the Omnitrix never existed, and as a result, that world's Ben was basically just your average teenager. He played soccer, hung out with his friends, just did no superhero stuff. However, one night his world kind of got upended when he was attacked by a group of evil versions of himself from other universes, led by Eon and Vilgax. Thankfully, because of the intervention of Professor Paradox, the Prime Ben, and their own team of good Bens, he was saved. However, as both teams of Bens clashed, Vilgax revealed an ace up his sleeve in the form of a device called a Chronosapien Time Bomb that, normally, when activated, has the power to wipe out an entire timeline. However, Vilgax reconfigured the device so that instead of wiping out No Watch Ben's timeline, it would wipe out every other timeline but his, as well as anyone from other timelines. And as a result, when the device was activated, every Ben on the battlefield was wiped out. However, before the Prime Ben could be erased, he managed to pass his Omnitrix along to his watchlist counterpart, and basically left him with the final words of, "It's just a gadget, be the hero," before No Watch Ben was ultimately the only one left in the battlefield, with Vilgax as well, as I'm assuming that he managed to kind of exempt himself from being erased alongside his reality, since he's the one that configured the time bomb and so forth. However, before Vilgax could wipe out No Watch Ben, Paradox managed to pull No Watch Ben out of the fight, and so last episode ended with a pair of them going off to try and undo what Vilgax did, which is where this episode begins, as Paradox brings No Watch Ben back in time to Vilgax's ship. So, what's going on is, since Vilgax basically wiped out the entirety of the Ben 10 multiverse, then they need to reboot it, so to speak. And since the only reality left from the Ben 10 multiverse is one where Ben never found the Omnitrix, well, then they need to make sure that Ben actually finds it. And as a result, they have gone back in time to in the Prime timeline to the day when Ben first found the Omnitrix, and their job is basically to ensure that Ben finds it again. Because of this, No Watch Ben has to basically use, his Omnitrix now to try and tinker with things and make sure that the Ben of this time actually is able to find the Watch. And as such, how he does this is that he goes gray matter to mess with the shields in Vilgax's ship so that they're defenseless when they're being fired upon. He then has to go cannonbolt and blast himself out of the ship to affect the Omnitrix's trajectory when it's sent down to Earth so that it will land in front of Ben, and then to try and further give his 10-year-old self the means to get the Omnitrix, he goes Armadillo, shakes the Earth, and causes him to fall into the crater where the Omnitrix landed, which of course eventually results in 10-year-old Ben getting the Omnitrix and, going heat blast and burning the forest down. So, hey, they at least made sure that everything happened the way it was supposed to, but that also means that by making that event occur, that means that that every other alternate timeline that was created from this will also occur. And since law of causality is a thing, and the timeline continues along how it's supposed to, then that means eventually that Vilgax is still going to enact his whole plan to gather his team of evil Bens and subsequently wipe out the multiverse. Which means that, No Watch Ben and Paradox still have their work cut out for them, as they need to find the various good Bens and recruit them to their side so they can go off and face Vilgax and stop him from, wiping out all of existence. As such, Paradox takes No Watch Ben away, as 10-year-old Ben is freaking out about burning the forest down, and, they travel to the next universe over, which is also sort of taking place on the same night that Ben first found the Omnitrix. Sort of. You see, they end up at the campsite where the rust bucket is, and there's a tent set up, and at first No Watch Ben thinks that they're there to recruit this world's Ben. However, as he peeks into the tent, he sees his 10-year-old self sleeping there, but he's not wearing an Omnitrix, which confuses No Watch Ben until he's tackled by Accelerate. Or more specifically, he's tackled by Gwen, who's become Accelerate. Yep, we are seeing Gwen 10's timeline, which I want to talk about this because I'm sure that there are plenty of people who already know this, and I'm probably just preaching to the choir here, but there's a question to be raised about whether the Gwen 10 variant that we see in this episode is the same one as in the Gwen 10 episode or a different version altogether. And personally, I think it's a different version altogether. Now, don't get me wrong. from what we have presented here in her, from what we're presented of her timeline, there's plenty of events that coincide with the Gwen 10 episode that would easily make you think that this is the same timeline. Of course, the most obvious thing is that Gwen has the Omnitrix instead of Ben. We see Ben snoozing away in the tent like we saw him doing at the midway point of the Gwen 10 episode after Gwen destroyed Vilgax's robot, and on top of that, her alien designs do, when we actually see the ones that she used from the Gwen 10 episode, do look almost exactly the same as they were in that episode. Not note to note the same, but very close enough. However, the reason why I think this Gwen 10 is not the same one as in that episode is because while there are similarities between this version of events and that one, they're not completely the same either. For starters, the circumstances behind Gwen finding the Omnitrix. In the Gwen 10 episode, the Ben we were shown in that episode was clearly from a variant of the Prime timeline, because that Ben remembered finding the Omnitrix, and from his perspective, he woke up one day and it was the first day of summer again, and as a result, he was there when Gwen found the Omnitrix, and subsequently was the one to teach her how to use it. Whereas in this timeline, Gwen finds the Omnitrix not because she beat Ben to the punch, but because Ben was sleeping when the Omnitrix landed Earth, and Gwen was the one to go out and investigate. As Gwen put it, Ben snoozed, he lost. So, or he snoozed, he lose. Whatever. Point is, how she got the Omnitrix was different from that. On top of that, there are also some aesthetic differences between this timeline and the other one and the main timeline. So, like, for example, while Gwen is still wearing the same clothes that she wore in the Prime timeline, blue shirt, cat face on the front, the cat face is the number 10 in it. And as I said last week when we saw this variant of Gwen, the Omnitrix is the wrong color, as instead of it being black white with a green dial, it's shades of blue with different colored veins and a pink dial. So again, that also alone shows that that's differences. Now, ultimately though, both of these 2 points are could easily just be written off. You could argue, since the Ben of this time was sleeping, you could argue that it was the Prime Ben and that Gwen just kind of pretended that she found out on her own because she just wanted to make No Watch Ben jealous, because he got upset that he was the only Ben in the multiverse who never even got to see an Omnitrix. And likewise, you could chalk the little aesthetic differences, like the 10 on her shirt and the different colored Omnitrix, to just being differences in animation. Because even when we saw 10-year-old Ben when No Watch Ben and Professor Paradox ensured that he found the Omnitrix, it was the same animation style as Omniverse. So it's clear that there are some little differences here and there. But the last point of mine that I think proves that this is not the Gwen 10 timeline that we saw in the Gwen 10 episode in the classic series is the fact that she has access to aliens that she should not have access to. If you remember, the 10 aliens that Ben had access to in the classic series are, and I quote, Wildmutt, Forearms, Grey Matter, Diamond Head, Ripjaws, Upgrade, Ghost Freak, Stinkfly, Accelerate, and Heat Blast. Those were the 10 aliens that Ben had access to in the beginning. He unlocked more as the series went along, but in the beginning, it was just 10. And it's clear from every little bit of information we see about this Gwen's timeline that her wielding the Omnitrix is new to her. She just got it that night, so she is still figuring out how to use it. So then I have to ask, why does she have access to Wildvine? Yeah, remember last week we saw Gwen access the Omnitrix and she transformed into Wildvine. And on top of that, later on in this same episode, we see Gwen transform into Cannonbolt. Man, since those are 2 aliens that she should not have access to at this time, that gives me the impression that this is an alternate timeline from the Gwen 10 episode. There are clearly still similarities between that story and this one, but they are not the same. That's what I'm thinking. Again, you can disagree with me if you want. I haven't really heard people debate about this since, again, the points I just listed are probably pretty obvious, but hey, I wanted to put my voice out in that choir, so there you go. Either way, back on topic. While Gwen attacked No Watch Ben, he's able to fight her off as he goes Wildmutt to trip her up as Accelerate, and then by the time both of them return to their human forms, Ben is able to explain the situation and lets her know multiverse is doomed, we need your help. And Gwen agrees to help because, well, this may be a different version of Ben, but it's still Ben and their family, and she's not going to abandon family. As such, with Gwen on their side, the trio end up leaving this reality, and they head to, well, Dimension 23, as we see the man of the hour, the guy that we're all here for, Ben 23, as he's in the middle of fighting Eon. So this is during the point when Eon was going around recruiting Bens for his and Vilgax's team, and well, apparently he came to Dimension 23 to recruit this world's Ben, and Ben 23, despite having a massive ego, is not one to work with the bad guys, so he told Eon to go pound sand, and so Eon is retaliating by attempting to wipe him out. As such, Ben 23 is doing the best he can to fight Eon, even showcasing his version of I Guy. And while No Watch Ben and Gwen want to jump in and help their Dimension 23 counterpart, well, No Watch Ben's Dimension 23 counterpart, but semantics, Paradox tells them not to do it, because if Eon sees that there are multiple Omnitrix bearers in a single timeline, then he'll know that there are other cross-time travelers, and he and Vilgax will alter their plan accordingly. As such, No Watch Ben decides that if they're going to help Ben 23, they need to do so in a way that doesn't tip Eon off that they're here. As such, as Eon unleashes a giant time blast on Ben 23, it basically covers the entire area in smoke. And from here, No Watch Ben comes in and grabs Ben 23 and pulls him out. And then before the smoke clears, Gwen goes for her Omnitrix and goes Diamond Head and starts fighting against Eon. As such, once No Watch Ben pulls Ben 23 aside to recuperate, Gwen takes over fighting and does her best to fight off Eon, which confuses him because he wonders how this world's Ben was able to change up his aliens so fast. However, in the middle of the fight, when No Watch Ben ends up calling out Gwen by name, Ben 23 realizes, holy shit, is that cousin Gwen? I'm gonna go help her. And so, as Gwen is thrown into a building, Ben 23 goes Stinkfly, and out of view, he comes in and starts fighting against Eon, who's confused by the fact that Ben 23 seems to be very adept at getting around and using his Omnitrix, and Eon decides that maybe it ain't worth it to go after this Ben. And so, as Ben 23 is pelting him with a bunch of slime, Eon opens a portal and leaves. As such, all the Bens and Gwen recuperate with Professor Paradox, and they let Ben 23 know what's going on with the multiverse. And while at first Ben 23 is a little hesitant to help them because he's already got a full schedule as is, they end up convincing him because, well, if he doesn't help them, there won't be anything left at all for him to have in his schedule. And so Ben 23 just lets his people know that he's going to be busy, and so he goes off with them in the multiverse, with No Watch Ben admitting to Gwen that this Ben is probably a doofus, so yeah. But either way, after they make a quick pit stop in a universe where Archit found the Omnitrix, I am not even kidding, it's even gold, and he's rich because of it, they end up popping over into the future, specifically to recruit Ben 10,000. And this is once again where I do want to bring up Ben 10,000, as I did sort of allude to this last week. So the thing about Ben 10,000 is that there's more than one of him. And I know what you're thinking. Well, yeah, of course there's more than one of Ben 10,000. This whole two-parter is about the multiverse, right? Well, the thing is, every series of Ben 10 has had their own version of Ben 10,000, with the exception of Alien Force. But the thing is, every series that has showcased Ben 10,000 has had him be different each time. There's, of course, the Ben 10,000 that we saw in the classic series, who mastered the Omnitrix and became a full-time hero. But after that, in Ben 10 Ultimate Alien, we were introduced to a different version of Ben 10,000, one from a future where he actually mastered the Ultimatrix to the point where he didn't even need to transform anymore. All he had to do was access the evolution feature in his human form, and it gave him access to all of his all the powers of all of his aliens by just slapping the Ultimatrix symbol. Which, admittedly, I kind of liked that. It was kind of cool. Unfortunately, it's also the episode that introduced the retcon with Eon, and I didn't care for it, and I don't care for that. And I can understand why other people wouldn't like the episode, but I personally liked it. And on top of that, and to kind of go off of that, like I said, Ben Omniverse also had its own Ben 10,000, which we saw last week, when he popped into the battlefield and used his Biomnitrix, as I called it, and what is officially called, to go for Mungosaur on the battle. And, well, we see him here in this future. And the thing is, he's supposed to apparently be the same Ben 10,000 from the classic series? And I don't buy that. I don't buy that one bit. The thing is, the Ben 10,000 that we saw in the classic series was a Ben 10,000 that was conceived before a lot of the changes to the Ben 10 canon were presented. Case in point, in the Ben 10,000 timeline that we saw in the classic series, Ben continued kind of being an egotistical prick long into the future. Gwen more than mastered her magical abilities to the point where she was pretty much a sorceress. In that timeline, Kevin was still a bad guy. He never matured. He never grew up. He never got into a relationship with Gwen, and he lived his entire life wanting to prove he was better than Ben, even into adulthood. Even when he had a kid, he was still a massive prick. So I find that the whole idea of trying to reintroduce that version of Ben 10,000 and claim that he was always canon, I find it dumb. I find that dumb. Too many things contradict with that. And I know what some of you are probably going to say. You could argue that the Kevin 11,000 back in the Ken 10 episode was under mind control, since, because the thing is, part of the whole thing with Kevin in Omniverse is that to try and, I brought this up in my Alien Force vlogs, but to try and explain the fact that, explain away the plot holes with Kevin being half Osmosian and that his dad was a plumber, it turned out that those were all implanted false memories, and that in reality he was actually being controlled by this rogue plumber scientist named Cervantes and all that. And you could argue that in the Ken 10 episode, that maybe happened again, but I think that's bullshit. Especially since what happened in the Ken 10 episode basically disproved that theory by, again, showcasing that Kevin was a very absent father. As Devlin put it, Kevin was apparently locked in the null void for most of Devlin's childhood. And the Kevin we were presented with very much seemed a lot like the Kevin from when he was a kid. And again, you could argue maybe Cervantes altered his mind, but I feel like, in my opinion, that kind of cheapens the whole episode, don't you think? After all, Kevin 11,000 was horrifying because he never grew up. Yeah, he was an adult, but he was still in the mindset of a kid. And the idea of an adult with all the powers that Kevin had, still thinking like a bratty 11-year-old kid trying to prove he was the best is terrifying. And it was showcased rather brilliantly in just how brutal and sadistic and cruel Kevin 11,000 was. And so the idea of them saying, oh no, he was under mind control that whole time, I feel like it's a giant fuck you to people who liked that episode. And again, I could be talking out of my ass. I am not going to say that I speak for the fan base on this. If you can accept that version of events takes place in the same timeline as this version of events, fine, whatever. That's on you. If you like it, you like it. I personally don't. I think it's stupid and contradictory. And on top of that, part of the reason why I don't want to accept that the version of Ben 10,000 is the same Ben 10,000 in the classic series, Ken doesn't have his Omnitrix. Yeah, he doesn't have it. Later episodes in Omniverse have been showcase Ken, and he's older now, which I'm okay with, but the thing is, he doesn't have his Omnitrix. And in a later episode, in a throwaway line, he mentions to his dad, when you took back my Omnitrix, and I'm just sitting here thinking, why would he take it back? It was a fucking Christmas present, and Ken wanted it because he wanted to be a hero like his dad. And part of the whole point of the Ken 10 episode was Ken trying to prove to his dad that he could be competent. And Ben gave Ken the Omnitrix because, hey, he got the Omnitrix when he was 10, so why shouldn't his son get the Omnitrix? So I find it stupid that Ben 10,000 decided to do a take-backsies with Ken's Omnitrix just because he didn't want him to have it till he was ready. Because I'm honestly just, no, that's stupid. That is incredibly stupid. You could argue that he was always planning to give it back, but I think that is stupid. Plus, where's Devlin? Where's Devlin in these whole events? If this is supposed to be the same timeline as in the classic series, where the hell is Devlin? I want to know what happened to him. Is he Gwen's son in reality? I don't know. It's stupid. I don't know. It's just, the more they try to say that this version of events is the same as the classic timelines version of events, the more I find problems with it, and I just don't agree with it. In my opinion, this version of Ben 10,000 is, like the Ultimate Alien Ben 10,000, just another possible future, another alternate timeline, one that's pretty damn similar to the version of events that we saw in the classic series, but not the same either. I'm okay with this version of Ben 10,000 existing. After all, Ben 10,000 is just as versatile as every alternate version of Ben. So again, if the idea of there being different versions of him out there in the multiverse is a good one in my opinion. And I do like that every time we see a new version of Ben 10,000, his gimmick is different. And it makes sense for his gimmick to be different. You gotta not only keep it fresh, but it's kind of cool to see the ways that Ben innovates his hero work and how he utilizes the Omnitrix. So I do think it's cool to see that differentiation between all these different timelines. It's just that I call into question them trying to say that it's the same Ben 10,000 from the classic series is all I'm saying. So, but anyway, rant over. I got to get back to the plot summary. Either way, Professor Paradox and the cadre of Bens, plus Gwen, do arrive on the scene, and Ben 10,000 immediately realizes that, well, there's a threat to the multiverse that requires Omnitrix bearers. And so he says that they gotta get ready to go, and so he goes to no-watch Ben's Omnitrix and transforms him into an alien called Clockwork, who is basically just a giant wind-up clock with time powers. And funnily enough, Clockwork was actually introduced in Ultimate Alien, specifically the Ben 10,000 Returns episode that again introduced the Ultimate Alien version of Ben 10,000 and the retcon with Eon. So kind of cool. But the thing is, Clockwork's also a Chrono Sapien, so it's his species that created that time bomb. However, as Ben 10,000 expects No-Watch Ben to use Clockwork, Paradox advises against it, because the thing is, there's a little gimmick with time travel in the Ben 10 multiverse. Basically, if anyone tries traveling through time or altering in time, it creates a ripple effect called the Sotobro effect, which basically allows anyone who's sensitive to time travel to sense something amiss in the timeline and potentially zero in on the cause. So, like, let's say for example, I had time powers in the Ben 10 universe, and I went back in time and I don't know, I punched a guy. No rhyme or reason. I just felt like punching a guy, and then I wound up altering the timeline because he missed his bus. Well, the thing is, doing that would cause a ripple in time. That is the Sotobro effect, and people who are sensitive to time travel will be able to sense it and zero in on me going back in time to deck this guy. And thus, which basically translates to that if No-Watch Ben uses Clockwork at this point, it'll tip Vilgax and Eon off to the fact that people are onto their plans, and again, they'll adapt. As such, Ben 23 has to turn back to normal and basically keep Clockwork in storage for now. Either way, though, they have Ben 10,000 on standby. He even tells his son Ken that he'll be out for a while. And so, after Ben 10,000 is on board, they go to the Prime timeline and recruit Ben, who doesn't even ask questions. Like, he just sees Paradox and Co. arrive in his room, and he's like, I'm in. And so, the team of Bens gets ready. As they all are outside of time, all do a big pep talk to try and get themselves riled up for the final fight, to know that even though their enemies may look like them, they can't hold back, yada yada yada, blah blah blah. Either way, Paradox ends up opening a portal, and him and the team of Bens end up going through, but the portal closes in No-Watch Ben's face, leaving him behind. At first, he's confused by this, but he assumes eventually his lack of confidence in his role catches up to him, as he thinks that he was left behind on purpose because he's not a real hero like those other Bens. However, Paradox arrives back on the scene and lets him know, no, that isn't the case. It's just more a matter of they can't fuck with the timeline. You see, the thing is, while No-Watch Ben has been jumping around the multiverse meeting other versions of himself, well, if you go back to the And Then There Were None episode, No-Watch Ben didn't remember seeing himself specifically to being a part of the final battle. So that means that if No-Watch Ben went back in time at this point, it would basically cause a lot of fucky-wucky problems with the time stream, and they can't really have that. As such, things have to pretty much go exactly as they did back in the And Then There Were None episode, and then No-Watch Ben can re-enter the fray once everything is settled down. As such, we then cut back to the No-Watch timeline, as No-Watch Ben was pulled out of the universe by Paradox, just as Vilgax was getting ready to stomp him. And so, as Vilgax once more makes his big speech about how the universe is now once and truly his and all that crap, No-Watch Ben re-arrives on the scene, and he has a lot more confidence to him. Of course, Vilgax is still being cocky and thinks he can easily beat No-Watch Ben without any issue, but No-Watch Ben flashes his Omnitrix, thinking that'll do anything, and all Vilgax says is, Oh, how kind. You saved an Omnitrix for me. Too bad you don't know how to use it. But No Watch Ben lets him know that he has had a crash course on it, and he's ready to face Vilgax no matter what. As such, he goes for his Omnitrix, and, well, he turns into Clockwork, which actually does scare Vilgax, which kind of makes sense. He just used Clockwork's species' bomb to wipe out the multiverse, and so No Watch Ben actually does pull something off. As going back to how Clockwork looks like a giant wind-up clock, there's a big dial on his head that he starts turning, and Vilgax doesn't stop him for whatever reason. But once he turns it all the way, he starts glowing, and he basically shoots out a ray into the sky that completely covers the Earth. And as the light from the ray ends up closing back in on the field, the Bens reappear, all of them, exactly from where they were when they disappeared. Which when all the energy is pulled back into No Watch Ben, Vilgax wonders what the hell, and so No Watch Ben explains. It was the Sotabro effect. Once he became Clockwork, he could sense the Sotabro effect from Vilgax using the Chronosapien time bomb. So what he did? He just pulled all that energy back in. Basically, from the perspective of Vilgax, he just wiped out the entire timeline, and then basically No Watch Ben hit the undo button on that. So, yeah, Vilgax is kind of pissed, although he doesn't really have a chance to retaliate against No Watch Ben, as Eon tackles Vilgax because he's a little pissed that Vilgax betrayed him. But either way, the battle between the two teams of Bens recommences because, well, even though those Bens were technically betrayed by the guy they were working for, they're still not the good guys, and they immediately begin attacking their good counterparts. As Ben 23 and Nega Ben try fighting before Ben 23 gets turned back to normal, Gwen comes in to help Ben 23 before Ben Zaro comes in to try and fight her. And then Ben 23 goes up Chuck to try and help Gwen, and then likewise Prime Ben, who's currently without an Omnitrix since his Watchless counterpart currently has it, is being chased by Albedo, Mad Ben, and Bad Ben, who are all just basically trying to get him to dance by shooting at him. But Thankfully, though, No Watch Ben is able to turn the tide as, well, he's still Clockwork, and he basically just shoots out an energy beam at all of the Bens and sends all of the evil Bens back to their timelines, leaving only the good Bens behind and Vilgax. And Vilgax is, well, kind of pissed as he gets back up and gets ready to fight them, and so No Watch Ben returns to his human form and, well, he figures that it's time to return what isn't his, as he removes the Omnitrix and gives it back to Ben. I'm going to assume that Paradox told him how he could do that at some point because, again, the Omnitrix doesn't come off easy, and considering that No Watch Ben is just as new to this whole hero thing as his 10-year-old self was, I'm surprised he was able to do it so quickly. Either way, though, all of the Bens end up going alien to fight Vilgax. Ben Prime goes Diamond Head, Ben 23 goes Shock Squatch, Gwen 10 goes Cannonbolt, and Ben 10,000 goes Atomic X, and basically it's just a beat down from there as all four of them gang up on Vilgax and proceed to beat the ever-living shit out of him, and just knock him around for funsies. And it all kind of culminates as they knock Vilgax to the other side of La Soledad, and then Gwen goes into her ball form, gets a charge up from Ben 23 as Shock Squatch. She gets sent off. Ben creates a diamond platform to her to fly off on to hit Vilgax so hard it sends him flying out before Ben 10,000 warps to him, flicks him into the air, and he just flies into the air and lands smack dab in the middle of Soledad. Not woozy, but not unconscious just yet. And so as all the Bens and Gwen return back to their human forms, Prime Ben tells his Watchless counterpart that he's earned this, as No Watch Ben delivers the coup de grace. He delivers a kick straight to Vilgax's face, knocking him out. So, yeah. That was awesome. That was completely So, yeah. Timeline's been restored. All the evil Bens have been sent back to their proper timelines, and Vilgax has just been put out for the count. I say it's a job well done, right? Well, Paradox agrees as well, as since the multiverse is now safe, he opens a portal and pretty much tells the other Bens kindly to hit the road, as their services are no longer required. As such, as everyone shares their goodbyes and bids farewell, all the alternate Bens, minus Prime Ben, end up leaving and waving goodbye as the portal closes behind them. However, as No Watch Ben and Prime Ben are left behind with Vilgax, they're kind of wondering what the hell they're going to do with him. Well, immediately they get their answer as who should show up on the scene, but in this reality's Max Tennyson, and the plumbers. Yep, even in a world without the Omnitrix, the plumbers are still a thing. And we learned that Max's prosthetic arm does a lot more than we thought, as it turns out it's a giant robot arm which he uses to pick Vilgax up just as the other plumbers arrive on the scene. As such, No Watch Ben wants to know what the hell is going on, but Max lets him know that he wanted to tell him for so long, but there are protocols in place to stop him. But since Ben is here, the cat's out of the bag, so he can finally share this side of his life with him. And Ben is just happy to see this as he ends up running up to his grandpa, as Max is taking Vilgax away to be locked up. Either way, Prime Ben watches happily as he sees his watchless counterpart just talking with Max, as he realizes that he may still not have an Omnitrix, but he's probably going to be a hero. And so Paradox re-arrives on the scene to send Prime Ben home, and he actually leaves Ben with these final parting words, which I think are a really good way to end this episode. So many ways to tell a story, and that's what makes them so interesting. Sometimes you can never predict how they're going to turn out. And so the episode ends as Ben Prime goes back to his world. So, yeah. That was And Then There Were Ben / And Then There Were None. And then there was Ben / And Then There Were None. And my thoughts on this two-parter, it's really fucking good. I cannot pretend it isn't. It is, by all accounts, just a really damn good two-parter. And it's not just because Ben 23 is involved. No. This episode is a love letter to Ben 10 fans in every way possible. From all the different variants of Ben, to seeing them all working together, from crossing the other timelines, to seeing them work side by side, to even focusing on a version of Ben from a world where he never found the Omnitrix and his journey to become a hero. I think it's all just really damn good. And both parts of this two-parter do a really good job at showcasing this tale and fleshing it out in all the best ways possible. And of course, to kind of get to the core of that, we need to go back to talking about No Watch Ben. Now, last week I mentioned how one of the best parts of And Then There Were None was just kind of seeing what Ben's life would be like in a world where he never found the Omnitrix. And everything I mentioned when I talked about that episode is true for this one. But whereas that episode was more showcasing how Ben would become as a person in a world where he never got the chance to be a hero, now we're seeing how No Watch Ben evolves now that he does have that chance. And I honestly like it. Now, admittedly, that kind of character development is kind of put on hold a little when he and Paradox are going from universe to universe recruiting alternate Bens. But even when in the beginning of the episode, when Paradox and No Watch Ben are trying to reboot the Ben 10 multiverse by ensuring Ben Prime finds his Omnitrix, you really do see the workings of No Watch Ben trying to prove himself. When he first dials into the Omnitrix to turn into an alien, he's excited, like, okay, I got to see how this works, and it's time to show Vilgax who's boss, which I did kind of like. His awkwardness when he's doing all the hero stuff is palpable, but actually nice, and he still has the confidence that a lot of the other Bens have. While he's still clearly new at this and is still getting his feet wet with all the hero stuff, at the same time, you can still see that earnest desire to do good and want to help others. And I do like that, and it permeates throughout the episode. Now, admittedly, the character stuff with No Watch Ben was stronger in the last part compared to this one. But again, I'm willing to kind of ignore all that because what we presented with in the episode is still a good conclusion to his character, especially since when it comes time for the final battle and all the Bens have to go in to fight Vilgax's team, he's left out, and he thinks to himself that the reason for that is because he's not a real hero. But it turns out in reality, it's just causality. They can't have him crossing his own timeline, so they have to wait a little bit before he can re-enter the fight. So I find that to make sense. And the thing is, throughout the entire episode, while he's clearly still a novice and just trying to figure out how things are working, he does what any good variant of Ben would do. He just tries to put his best foot forward. He just wants to help people. He just wants to do the right thing. And that's, I think, what proves that he is a hero. He's willing to step into danger, damn the consequences, even knowing that he could die. When he goes back and fights Vilgax, he's still clearly a little nervous, but he has more confidence now. And even knowing that he barely knows anything about the Omnitrix, he's still flashing it in Vilgax's face, showing, if you mess with me, I will use this. this. And even when Vilgax tries throwing in his face that he has no idea how to really use it, No Watch Ben is still ready to face him. And guess what? He gets a win on him as he goes clockwork and basically hits the undo button on what Vilgax did. Sorry, also that I'm sweaty. It's hot right now. So at the very least, it is cool seeing No Watch Ben do it. And by the end, when he's done using the Omnitrix and he willingly gives it back to his prime counterpart, I do like that. And even when he's clear that he's not as quote unquote as special as his other counterparts, he doesn't care because he just proved that he was a hero. He just fought side by side with all these other different versions of himself to save reality, and they won. And that's awesome for him. Yeah, he still can't do as much physically as them as well. While they were all trashing Vilgax with their aliens, he had to sit on the sidelines until it was time to deliver the final blow. But at the same time, he's still happy that he was a part of it. And by the end, we also see that despite Ben not having an Omnitrix in this timeline, he could still very well become a greater hero, because now that he's discovered he's discovered his world's plumbers and that his grandfather is one of them, he wants to step in and see he wants to be a part of it. He wants to ask his grandpa what's going on. He probably is going to be excited to let these guys know, hey, I just fought alongside a whole cadre of other me's. It's actually, and I feel like that with Max realizing that Ben is now a greater part of what's going on with the plumber and with aliens and the supernatural and the multiverse, he would want to bring Ben in, especially since he's been seeing No Watch Ben and how he's been feeling when he would be feeling with him not achieving what he considers greatness. And so to see No Watch Ben get that confidence by seeing what his life could have been like in all these other worlds where he did become a hero, it could probably encourage Max to want to bring more of that out. Especially since if we go back to the Gwen 10 episode, at the end of that episode when Max wound up with the Omnitrix and Ben screamed that he'd never be a hero again, Max is the first person to tell him, you ask me, you just did. That's Ben. And I do not see a single reality, unless there's one where Max is a jerk, where he wouldn't tell Ben that you can be a hero even if you don't have a special alien watch. I like that. And I do like that by the end of the episode, they still give us hope that No Watch Ben will become a hero. So, yeah. I did like that. I did like that. Yeah, we still get plenty of good multiverse stuff, but the thing is, again, because we're seeing all this multiverse stuff from the point of view of No Watch Ben, it allows us to still focus on his character while still giving us all the cool fan service of seeing all these different versions of Ben fighting side by side or against each other in the case of the evil Bens. So it's still really damn awesome. And the climax of the episode is still really damn good. Seeing all these different versions of Ben going alien, fighting each other, fighting alongside each other, helping each other out. It's cool. And it's something that I kind of loved with all of the different variants of Ben is that when they saw Gwen, they butted heads a little. I mean, they loved having her around, and family comes first. They help each other out. But she throws a few digs at the other Bens, and all of them collectively at one point or another call her dweeb. Going back to the Ben 10,000 thing, when she sees how mature and responsible Ben 10,000 is, she makes a jab at it, and Ben 10,000, Ben 23, and No Watch Ben all at the same time say dweeb. And then likewise, during the final battle, when all the Bens and Gwen are restored, when Ben 23 says, thanks, cuz, Ben Zaro says, cousin mean, before turning into Frankenstrike by headbutting his Omnitrix, and the first thing he says when he transforms is, cousin dweeb. Like, God, even in a world where the kid's a zombie, he still calls his cousin a dweeb, which that scene also had another funny moment too, as when Ben 23's Omnitrix recharged, he started dialing through his aliens and he started naming them, and of course there is typical lame names, like Echo is copy, or of course Charcoal Man, blah 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 blah. And when Gwen hears all this, she goes, seriously? And at first you think that she's complaining about him about his naming convention, but no, she's calling attention to the fact that he gives his aliens superhero names at all, which I kind of find hilarious. I just kind of love that. It's a nice twist on the gag, and of course Gwen would be the one to go, wait, you actually name your aliens? That's kind of stupid. I kind of love that. I love that. So in that regard, the episode really just feels like a fun time all around, both the first part and the second part. When it comes down to character stuff, I love that we focused this entire two-parter on No Watch Ben. Yeah, we still get all these other different variants of Ben Tennyson thrown around throughout, and I found them to be awesome. I love seeing them. I love seeing them work off of each other. I love seeing them work against each other. I love just seeing all these different versions of Ben duking it out. As a multiverse nut, I think it's just cool, but having the story focus on a version of Ben from a world where he never found the Omnitrix, and following his journey as he finally has to prove himself, has the chance to prove himself as a hero, I find it really good. I liked the character stuff that we were presented with in And Then There Were None, and to see that character further expanded on in And Then There Was Ben, as we see No Watch Ben have to be the one to bring all these other alternate Bens together, and then basically rally them up to go and face off against Vilgax. I like that. I genuinely like that. And seeing him kind of learn the ropes with the Omnitrix, he uses it to help his other selves, and likewise reboot the Ben 10 multiverse, I actually did like seeing. And by the end, while he still doesn't know as much about the Omnitrix as his other selves do, he at least has enough of a grasp of it that he feels confident facing Vilgax now. Especially when, again, he goes clockwork and basically just does everything that Vilgax did with the bomb. So I liked that. I think it's cool. And I love that by the end, there's still hope. Yeah, this Ben is never going to have an Omnitrix again, but that doesn't mean he can't be a hero. And the fact that he's now been introduced to his world's plumbers and now knows his grandfather is one, it probably gives him that extra boost. And even if he doesn't end up joining the plumbers in this timeline, I get the impression that knowing that he's capable of doing good and that he has done good in the past probably would be enough of a confidence booster to help improve his personality and make him feel more satisfied with himself. I kind of like that. It's nice. And again, to kind of cap it all off with Paradox quoting the final line from the Gwen 10 episode, namely, there's so many different ways to tell a story, I think it's a good capstone to what we saw in this episode. That, yeah, the story may not be told the same way each time, but it's always interesting to see how they turn out and just to see what common factors come together to tell the tales we know. I like those. If I can give one complaint, though, and I know I'm going to be the odd man out for this, so I'm sorry, I didn't like the first third of this episode specifically. And I'm not talking about And Then There Were None. I already brought up the big problem I had plot-wise with that episode, with the short-sightedness of Vilgax's plan to wipe out the multiverse, with the fact that Ben Prime's Omnitrix survived just kind of being a lucky fluke. But my big problem with the And Then There Was Ben episode was them rebooting the timeline. Now, meta-wise, I understand why they did it. And story-wise, I like how they explained it. Because after all, if Vilgax erased every other timeline where Ben had an Omnitrix and left the one universe where there was no Omnitrix, well, then the best way to ensure the Ben 10 multiverse comes back is to ensure that Prime Ben finds the Omnitrix, as doing that will set off all the series of events that create those other timelines. So that in turn makes sense. I like that. I do think it makes sense. My problem with it is that the way they do it implies that from the very beginning of the series, Paradox and No Watch Ben were the ones that made Ben find the Omnitrix back in the And Then There Was 10 episode. And I'm going to be honest here, I think that's stupid. I know I'm in the minority on that one. I know that I've seen people online praising the fact that they did this. That they said, oh, it brings it all together, shows them actually going back in time and calling back to the series' roots and all that. But I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that they're pretty much just saying, oh, Ben was always supposed to find the Omnitrix, that it was supposed to be in his hands, that he was supposed to be this big special person and yada, yada, yada. And I'm just going to say right now, I find that stupid. It's kind of like it's like if you said that Spider-Man was the only one that the Spider would have given superpowers to, or the Doctor is actually this super special alien creature from some other dimension who's actually the progenitor of the Time Lords and all that. And yes, I don't like the Timeless Child retcon. What makes you think I did? What makes you think that? My point is this: it adds a certain level of grandiosity to Ben's backstory that we really didn't need to have. I think it was just a better idea if Ben just randomly found the Omnitrix and then used it to become a hero. The idea of him finding the Omnitrix being preordained and having to be one of those things that absolutely must happen kind of deal, is kind of dumb. I just kind of find that whole predestined chosen one bullshit to just be unnecessary and not needed in order for Ben's backstory to work. Ben's story as a character worked when he was just a kid who found this device and wanted to use it to become a hero. And the thing is, the fact that there are other timelines where other people find the Omnitrix and use it, like in the Gwen 10 timeline, does show that Ben was not always destined to find this watch. So again, the idea of him getting it in the first episode basically being one of those key moments in time absolutely has to happen, I just kind of find to be a little dumb. I understand meta-wise why they're doing it, and story-wise I can get behind it. It's just the implications of this retcon I find to just be very stupid, and I don't care for it. So yeah, you can get on my case all you want about that, but that's just my opinion. If you disagree with me on that and you like this twist, good on you. Keep liking it. I just don't, so there you go. Also, this is another thing I wanted to bring up. So remember last week when I talked about how one of the problems that I had with No Watch Ben's timeline pretty much being the boring timeline? Well, I actually do have an explanation for that, and the explanation actually comes in this episode, because after all, as we see in this episode, the plumbers are still active in this reality, just like they are in the Prime timeline. But the thing is, one of the things they stated throughout the Ben 10 canon was that for the longest time, the plumbers were inactive on Earth after Max defeated Vilgax the first time, as the alien activity on Earth dried up, and so the plumbers decided that the Earth branch plumbers were basically unneeded, so they disbanded them and everyone went into retirement. Well, the thing is, kind of going back to when Max arrived on the scene and arrested Vilgax, as he and No Watch Ben went off and they talked about everything, he mentioned offhand that it was Vilgax that cost him his arm so long ago. And my personal theory is the reason why No Watch Ben's timeline was as uneventful as it was because of the plumbers. I personally believe that in a world where Ben never found the Omnitrix, that Earth wasn't as peaceful as it was in the Prime timeline. Basically, I'm not going to say that this is the point of divergence between this timeline and the main timeline, but in this series of events, I think that when Vilgax attacked Earth and Max sent him away, something happened. The battle was more gruesome than we saw in the Prime timeline when Max told his story in the Truth episode. As again, Max stated that it was Vilgax that cost him his arm. So what could happen was that Vilgax probably could have mangled Max, and thus the threats to Earth, and thus the plumber stuck around to try and help out Max. And even if alien activity still dried up on Earth, I like to think that Max was still an integral part of the plumbers, and even if they didn't do as much, him still trying to keep a lookout despite the heavy loss he faced helped keep the plumbers active on Earth. And as a result, when a lot of the things that happened in the classic series did happen, like the stuff with the Great One and how it tried to suck the Earth dry, or the stuff with Hex and him trying to steal, or like the stuff with Hex as he tried to access the world of magic and all that, or just any other events that occurred throughout classic Ben 10 that would have happened regardless of Ben's intervention, I think that the plumbers behind the scenes were working to fend them off. I think they were the ones trying to do everything they could to try and keep the world safe. And the thing is, even if things were different enough in this timeline that even if Max lost an arm, in this reality, he still took his kids on that summer vacation long road trip. And it stands to reason that he was aware that the plumbers were active in all these certain areas and then intentionally avoided the more interesting parts of the world just so that he could spare his grandchildren being caught in the middle. And as a result, all these great adventures that Ben and Gwen would have gone on because of Ben finding the Omnitrix just never happened because the plumbers were taking care of it and Max didn't want his kids to be involved. As a result, the most boring summer vacation ever. And I think that would explain it. And in a strange way, that would also explain why the Omnitrix probably never existed. If the plumbers are a much greater force in this timeline than they are in the Prime timeline, it stands to reason that you could argue that they stood a better chance at bringing alien races together, trying to actually make them feel stronger together, more compatible. And as a result, maybe Azimuth felt that there was no need for an Omnitrix and thus never went to work trying to create it. disappointed. Or he could have gotten the Omnitrix project started, enough for release rumors to go around, but then changed his mind at some point for whatever reason. Again, this is speculation, mind you, but this is a theory that I kind of like, and I think it would explain why Ben's summer vacation when he was 10 was still boring, despite the fact that a lot of things should have happened, regardless of whether Ben found the Omnitrix or not. But yeah, that's just my personal theory. Regardless, even though I do have my own personal issues with the two-parter every here and there, like with his plan feeling convoluted, or me not personally liking the whole cosmic destiny aspect of rebooting the Ben 10 multiverse, I still think this is still a really damn good two-parter. I love that the main focus is on No Watch Ben, and I think his journey throughout the episode of him becoming a hero in his own regard is actually a really good one. It was so awesome to see all these different versions of Ben working side by side together. The action, of course, was just straight up kick ass, and seeing Ben and Paradox go from one timeline to the next, recruiting all these different versions of themselves, was just a fun time. And by the end, with that faint bit of hope that Ben in this timeline, despite not having it on the tricks, will still becoming a hero, I think was a really damn good one. And echoing the final line of the Gwen 10 episode with Paradox, I think was a great way to send it off and really bring together everything that we saw in the episode. So on the whole, I think that this two-parter is just really kick-ass, and if you are a fan of Ben 10 at all, there is something that you will like about it. Again, I personally do have a couple problems with it, but even I cannot deny just how awesome this is, and again, those problems might just be a me thing. If you want, like I said, if you are a fan of Ben 10, find this two-parter, you will not be disappointed. So, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Samuel Johnson. Hopefully next week I won't be as sweaty. Seriously, it's fucking hot today. I need the Gatorade right now. But the next time we venture back into the Ben 10 multiverse, we're just going to be seeing Prime Ben and Ben 23 teaming up again, so to speak, as we see them get into even more hijinks and also pull in a third variant of Ben who we've seen in this two-parter. Well, and if you followed Ben 10 enough, you know who it already is. And I even spoiled it already, so maybe I'm just talking about my point is, go watch that. Either way, hope you have a good Friday. Hope you're not sweating like I am, and as always, take care.